Proposition number 2. At a time when our political culture seems so dysfunctional, and the social and environmental threats to the planet grows exponentially every year, the Jewish community needs to provide ways to advance tzedek in the world. So some of you are aware of this. In my book, Judaism and Justice, I document the explosion of new social justice organizations that frame tzedek in a Jewish key. And by the way, it happened in a very concerted period of time. It happened between 1979 and 1989. No less than a dozen organizations were founded during that period of time. American Jewish World Service, New Israel Fund, Mazon, Jewish Funds for Justice. I can go on, okay? Get the book. And I argue that the reason those organizations were founded was precisely because in the 70s and early 80s, the Jewish community was actually turning inward, was becoming more parochial at a time when Amka was going the other direction. Now, there's reason for that, okay? We felt ourselves under assault. We started getting stats about intermarriage, about assimilation, about non-affiliation. So the Jewish community, the stewards of the Jewish world, who are tribal, saying, okay, we got to kind of pull the wagons around in a circle and kind of really work on issues of Jewish continuity. If I had $1 for every Jewish continuity commission in the country, I'd be a rich man, okay? That's the focal point. But it was precise, that was the head-down version. If you picked your head up, Jews were saying, we want something more open. And the interest and the growth of the universe of Jewish social justice groups, okay, and I'm looking, Rachel Cowan was at the center of that when she was still at the Cummings Foundation. They funded so many of these groups and got them off the ground and provided that they needed capital for it. They were the social capital, you were the real capital for it, okay? Is something to be noted. That is telling us something. Part of the success of Panim, which I was privileged to lead for 21 years, is that we took Jews who had one step out of the Jewish world, okay? They all were, for the most part, bar mitzvah graduates, but they were like already, you know, they already had the show me thing, you know, like too much Jewish stuff, like, I did that, I'm out of here. But the message they heard was not when you hear a given version of God, Torah, and Israel, stand up and salute. It was rather, the message they heard was, there's a way to take Jewish wisdom and use it to essentially make a difference in the world. It may be around an issue related to the Jewish people, or Israel, the Jewish community, but it just might likely be somewhere else. Because, and we were willing to utter this heresy in the Jewish world, but something that was totally part of the reality of the young generation we work with, Jews are not the most vulnerable people on the planet. Like, you know, you say that in certain Jewish contexts, it's like, that is heresy, okay? You know, you can be excommunicated for saying and acting on that. Because part of what has driven the Jewish community, its tribal impulse for so long, is to say, we are at risk, okay? So rally around the flag. Mordechai Kaplan had a great quote, which says, it's long past time, he said this sometime around 1920, okay? Talk about looking into the future. It's long past time that Judaism stopped being a complex and began being a civilization. And we're still living that. We're still living out a complex that the world's out to get us and we're going to disappear. But that doesn't even pass the lab test with the post-tribal generation of Jews from Generation X, Y, and Millennials. Look at the interfaith organizing that's being led by Jewish Funds for Justice. A lot of that is on an interfaith basis. Faith-based community organizing that's not just about Jewish issues, but where synagogues are linking up with churches that have very different issues in the Jewish community, which is, you know, still out in middle-class suburbs. I'll give you one other piece of evidence from my congregation. I founded a Reconstruction synagogue in Bethesda, and I'm still privileged to lead services on occasion, and I do one special project a year. So last year, I went at the invitation of an Israeli organization called Tevel B'Tzedek, which is kind of the Israeli American Jewish World Service, led by Rabbi Micha Odenheimer. They do wonderful work in Nepal, and they were given money to get on the ground in Haiti right after the earthquake. So Micha reached out to me and asked me to go and work with the team of a dozen Israelis who had been there since the earthquake to do kind of a Jewish program. It's a whole other story because it turned out it was a challenge because they were almost all secular Israelis. And to make that more Jewish was a challenge, which I'll tell you some other time offline, okay? But the point was, while I was there, I connected not only with the Israeli team on the ground, but with a very charismatic young Haitian minister named Pastor Johnny, who had founded a church and started a school with 160 children. When I went back to Adash Shalom, I essentially told the story of Pastor Johnny, my experience in Haiti. We started a Haiti project and raised a significant amount of money, which we sent down to Pastor Johnny's school. And our plan was to do a service mission to Haiti with members of the congregation. Now, in the Christian world, this is not a new idea. Churches have been doing service missions all around the globe for decades. I'd love to know if we could come up with more than a half dozen synagogues in America that have done their own service missions. I don't think so. I'm not aware of it. If you know, tell me about it, okay? Very, very rare. Great, there's one. Okay, we'll work on it. I want to hear more, okay? So, okay. So, we had a last-minute glitch because the sponsor for our trip wound up deciding that as of December 15th, they no longer wanted untrained volunteers. So suddenly we were in crisis. We had to find another sponsor. We found it last minute. We had 2 weeks to fill the mission. We took 20 spots with a group called the Fuller Center for Housing, which was started by the guy who founded Habitat for Humanity. In 10 days, we filled 20 spots, people paying their own way, over $3,000 to go down December 26th for a week, to build houses and to interact with Pastor John's community. It took 10 days to fill that trip up. Something's going on here, friends. Okay? People said, this is how I want to live out what it means to be Jewish in the world. Proposition number 3. At a time when technology has made meaningful social intercourse much harder to come by, the Jewish community must offer places where people can find support in times of need, communal celebration in times of joy, and friendships to make life fulfilling. Look at the phenomenon of independent minyanim. I mentioned earlier Machon Hadar. The data is interesting. In the year 2000, we were able to count 6 independent minyanim in America. There's a conference actually coming up this weekend in Washington. The Machon Hadar has been doing it for the past 4 years. They now count about 120 independent minyanim. And I spoke to Ellie Confer this past week in working on my paper. The fact of the matter, they're not counting all the minyanim that are happening in synagogues. Now, I actually am not aware, tell me if I'm wrong, of anyone who's done a study of minyanim in synagogues, second minyanim apart from the main service, okay? I talk about it a lot in Finding a Spiritual Home. I'm guessing, because I'm not aware of any hard data on it, I'm guessing that there are probably between 200 to 300 such minyanim in America, okay? I'll let me be proven wrong on the high side or low side. That's my guess, just having done a lot of work in the American Jewish community and synagogues. This means people who are saying, I don't want to be in the main service, I don't want to be at the bar mitzvah, I want something that's more do-it-yourself, where there's more energy, whatever else. And in fact, when I travel and visit synagogues, I take the highest piece of technology that I carry with me, especially in Shabbat, which is my heart meter. And I go to the main service and it's flatlined. And I go to independent minyan in the library or the social hall, and it goes through the roof. And that's with all the mishigas that comes with independent minyanim in a synagogue. And there's a lot, okay? I'm aware of that. But there's something going on here as well. Take the independent minyan phenomenon the way Hadar defines it, add to it 200 to 300 minyanim that are happening in synagogues, and you're seeing Jews who want to do stuff on their own, okay? Now, there are a lot of Jews who just don't even get the prayer thing. So if you take that universe of independent minyanim and minyanim in synagogues, I would say you can multiply that number by at least 3 or 4 to see how many independent study groups exist by Jews who don't want to pray, but want to somehow engage Jewishly, okay? Again, a study needs to be done here, okay? Studying everything from Kabbalah to Jewish history, Jewish book clubs, Jewish cinema clubs, they're all over the place. And the phenomenon, by the way, is one documented in a book that came out in the early 1990s by Robert Wethnow, Sharing the Journey, thank you, Sharing the Journey, in which he talks about the interest of Americans, people of faith, and I use that term in quote because Jews don't talk that language, but people who are looking for small groups in which they can be with other people whose values are in sync with their own values, where they're creating their own spiritual community, without a building, without a clergy, without staff, without a budget, but this sharing the journey, and Jews are doing it as well. We've yet to find a way to capture this. In Finding a Spiritual Home, I talk about a new paradigm of the American synagogue. And I talk about how we need to move from what still is the predominant paradigm of the American synagogue, which is the synagogue center, to a new paradigm, and I have 4 synagogues which I use to illustrate and extract the new model, which I call the synagogue community.